I'm joined today by Donald Light, who's a professor at the Rowan University School of Osteopathic Medicine. He specializes in pharmaceutical industry myths, which is a topic that is very, very interesting, certainly to me, and I know to much of our audience. Donald, it's great to talk to you. Talk to us big picture. When we talk about myths in the pharmaceutical industry, what types of myths are we talking about?
Oh, well, we're talking about the claims by the industry year in and year out that their research costs are astronomical, and they are the principal reason why prices to patients have to be so high that they drain the household, live income, and a lot of, poorer families have to choose between food and their medicine.
That's
And
often
that,
come up in discussions about, even with the current administration, about sort of lowering prescription drug prices. And one of the facts that's often pointed out is that, well, the prices that are being charged in the United States are exponentially higher in many cases than the prices that are being charged for the same drug in other countries. So it appears to not logically follow that those prices are absolutely necessary in order to recoup research costs, right? I mean, it seems as though this is a market-based approach to pricing, where in countries where
yeah,
pharmaceutical companies can charge more, they are absolutely glad to.
that's right. So basically, every other affluent country, similar to the United States, the major other sources of both research and development and purchasing, have set up systems for evaluating how much better new drugs are than existing drugs, or worse, they're often safety problems. So 1 out of every 4 new drugs leads to serious adverse effects, and most people don't know that, but it's been repeatedly found. And then they set the price accordingly. The thing is that the FDA and the European regulators approve a lot of drugs that are very similar to existing drugs, and then they're marketed as new. And so other countries say, well, those drugs aren't much better, so we're not going to pay you much more, and therefore their prices are a good deal lower. While here, the drug lobbyists are there are more than twice as many lobbyists as members of Congress, and they work very closely with congressmen to put things in, for example, prohibiting Medicare from competing for prices, for having competition between manufacturers for getting on the formulary. And all that leads to prices being about 3 times higher than they are in Canada and major countries in Europe.
Now, to play devil's advocate, what about the argument that, okay, different prices are being charged in different countries, but it does connect to research and development costs, because the overwhelming amount of research and development costs are being incurred in the United States, and thus they are totally within their rights to recoup the majority of those costs in the United States. Does that argument hold any water?
Well, it's a widely promoted view by the industry, and I don't think it does. It kind of assumes there are national buckets or silos. So if that were really true, then you'd have to shut down all the great research going on in Switzerland, because there aren't very many people in Switzerland and their prices aren't that high. And so then you'd say, well, we're just going to have to shut down our operations in Switzerland because we're not getting enough income to recoup our R&D. And that same kind of argument is being made here about U.S. prices and U.S. markets versus U.S. R&D. But in fact, any good new drug is marketed throughout the world. So, for instance, Viagra was developed in England using British pounds. And my point is, and anyone who knows the international markets would say, it doesn't matter, then Pfizer will sell Viagra throughout the world. And so it's based on a false kind of buckets or silo argument.
There's another layer to sort of the mythology around R&D costs, which is that
Uh-huh.
once you establish what the R&D costs sort of really are, and as you're pointing out, that can be sort of difficult to do, There's also the reality that a lot of those costs are not just outflows from the private pharmaceutical company. A lot of the research that these developments are built on are research that is publicly funded and that, in a sense, taxpayers have sort of already paid for. Isn't that right?
That is correct. Taxpayers pay even more than that, a good deal more than that. So they pay for a lot of the very high risk in basic research to discover a new molecule, a new way to treat a disease, and that's all borne by the public, including very high rates of failure. But also, American taxpayers pay somewhere between 40 and 60% of all the company R&D in addition, because that huge network of lobbyists, more than twice the size of Congress, have over the years put in place all kinds of deductions and tax credits and tax subsidies for supporting R&D. And they make the same kind of argument. We need all the subsidies and tax credits and deductions that we can get because research is so very, very expensive. But that means that the public ends up subsidizing a good proportion of the company R&D as well.
What about the argument that can be made? And again, I'm not necessarily making this argument, but it's an argument that's made, which is that, listen, the development of these drugs benefits society at a much wider level once you account for all of the negative externalities of
Yeah.
diseases and conditions. So, number one, it makes some sense for taxpayers to be supporting that research. And number two, if you didn't dangle the possibility of massive profits in front of these companies, they would
Yeah.
not be, quote, incentivized by the market to even do it, and then we would be lacking a lot of these great medications. How does that sound to you?
Well, it's plausible, but it's a matter of degree. So, first of all, we have a long tradition in the United States, as do other countries, of publicly subsidizing research that benefits all of a nation's people and even the world in electronics and lots of other fields. It's a matter of degree. How much of a monopoly price setting do you allow in return for that? And in the case of pharmaceuticals, we have other related evidence that most of the research being done by pharmaceutical companies is not for important new drugs that are clinically better for patients, but for minor variations on already existing drugs so that these new drugs offer few or no additional benefits for patients. And the FDA doesn't even require evidence that new drugs are clinically better for patients to be approved, which I find amazing. It seems to me that we should only approve new drugs that are clinically shown to be clinically effective, but instead the regulations of the FDA, which have been significantly influenced by the industry, allow them to test against indirect measures of benefits and technical measures of benefits. And then they show that they can do that, and then they get approved. But after that, independent physician and pharmacy groups find that few of those drugs are clinically better. So it's also a matter of the degree to which that research is being put to things that really benefit society.
It's an absolutely important issue, and I'm so glad to have spoken to you about it. We've been speaking with Donald Light, who's a professor at Rowan University School of Osteopathic Medicine, and we're going to continue covering this issue. Thank you so much for talking to me today.
You're welcome.